Everyone, my name is Alan Scher. I'm the school's Associate Dean for Research and Technology, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our newest CAAD forum and a first-time speaker, Michael Averitt, who is a professor of practice for the Landscape Architecture program. So Michael's work focuses on the persistence of craft in an era of increasing digitalization. And he does so by trying to understand context. Now, when I say context plural, it includes physical and social, and most complicatedly, how they come together. He is also the founder of Site Agency. Yeah. I almost gave you a different firm.
There have been more than one, so it's all right.
There have been, because that does get to it. Because his prior firm, Delineator in Dallas, has won over half a dozen Texas ASLA awards. And so he has an established track record. Before that, he was with, we're going international on this part. We'll start kind of local, PWP in Berkeley, but also SWA, Shanghai, and SWA Dallas.
Yep.
I want to say something else in going on to this. One of the things we have here in the school, or we have lots of kinds of faculty. Among them are professors of practice like Michael. Often the professors of practice teach in our kind of core studios. In some ways, it seems like those are where we teach the basics. And it seems like, well, wait, they're teaching the basics. Does that mean their work is also fundamental? Well, yes, but they're actually able to do that because the work they do in professional practice is so accomplished. It's actually helping by working on complex, big projects that the clarity of the basics becomes most evident. And so they provide a very vital part to our overall curriculum. With that, I'd like to welcome Michael Averitt.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm excited to give this talk. So, before I get going on the main subject of my talk, I'd like to thank the Center for American Architecture and Design for giving me the opportunity to come and have this discussion with you all. Specifically Alan for the invitation and Bridget for your assistance in preparing for today. I'd also like to thank Hope Hasbrook for mentorship and support, as well as everyone else that listened to my wide range of ideas for the talk over the last couple months. Those of you that know me well may think that the title of my talk, On Time, is possibly an aspirational statement for me, or maybe a philosophical one. But today, instead of providing a deep dive on the philosophical or experiential connections between time and landscape architecture, I'd like to present a series of projects that use time as a design driver and evaluation tool. As Alan mentioned, I've worked professionally at a number of different offices. The work that I'll present today spans several of those. I've done my best to attribute the work to each office throughout, but if there's any questions regarding where, when, or what part of the work I was responsible for, please feel free to ask in the Q&A. So, So I'm going to start with an overview of where we're going with the talk. I'll define some terms that we'll be using throughout, such as circular design, how does it relate to time, other ideas that are common in landscape architecture related to these, such as sustainable design, resiliency, and so on. Next, I'll show a few of my professional projects that I believe will clarify these ideas. Some of them will be large-scale projects that utilize loop systems as a potential framework or scaffolding for future development. Others will be site-scale projects that use the metrics developed in those larger-scale systems as design drivers, so they can potentially accommodate changes in use over time. Then, I'm going to close with a discussion of some of the questions that I'm currently considering that are related to these topics. Circular design, time, loop systems, and their uses within the landscape architecture field. So, first, circular design can be defined in a very self-referential way, just tying it back to economic principles. I don't find this to be especially helpful, so I provided a second definition here. It gets a more expanded and sort of descriptive definition and gets at the essence of the idea. So here, number 2 is practice of creating durable, reusable, repairable, and recyclable products that create zero waste. My first interest in this approach developed in graduate school, pardon me, after reading a book called Cradle to Cradle by William McDonough and Michael Braungart. Their basic idea is to mimic the way the biosphere cycles nutrients and materials when we are designing products. Title is a play on the typical life cycle assessment in business of products called cradle to grave. Instead of taking a traditional linear product cycle of extracting materials, processing and combining them together into products, a customer using that product and eventually disposing of it at the end or being downcycled into lower quality inputs, they propose connecting the waste stream into the input at the beginning of the product cycle. This varies from traditional recycling because the very design of the product is informed by how its materials will be able to be reused at the end of its useful life. Now, there are some specific time spans that we'll be discussing today. Implicit in this approach is both a focus on the full lifespan of the product as well as flows within the life cycle of it. How can we use these to develop evaluation tools and metrics for designing public space? What are the implications of these time spans with respect to typical large urban scale or smaller site scale projects? Generally, when applying a circular design approach, long time frames require more adaptive designs to be more sustainable, while short time frames require more reusable components within those projects to be more sustainable. In Cradle to Cradle, the authors make a distinction between things that are designed to be used versus things that are designed to be consumed. In my opinion, this starts to provide an analog for how to apply their product design philosophy to landscape architecture projects. However, I'm going to sort of make a comparison to what I've experienced in practice. Many of the places I've worked, the project site's discussed and conceived as being one of two static states. Despite all the discussion that we have outside of practice regarding the unique potential of landscape architecture to capture different time frames in our work, such as the momentary experience of the individual, the day, the season, a year, or even like the lifespan of a tree. My experience in practice is the project sites are typically viewed as either the existing state that's received or what it looks like at the initial completion of the project. The approach I'm putting forward today attempts to illustrate at least two other time frames. There are, in my opinion, are many more, and I have other projects that I had to cut from the presentation that looked at other sort of moments within that. One regards the flows, or what I think of as the instantaneous and possibly continuous opportunity of the project site. The other considers the full lifespan of the project. Thinking about the built environment as a product with a life cycle and flows within it to be harnessed provides lots of interesting questions for me. It's not a new idea by any means, but my personal experience and practice is that it's especially difficult to capture the high-level opportunity and translate it down to the actual design of the site for a variety of reasons. So, I've curated a selection of my projects that I believe will help illustrate the way evaluating flows and lifespans as part of the design process can establish large-scale efficiencies and metrics that can be implemented at the site scale. First one we'll look at provides an example of the most straightforward application of circular design, which is simply trying to mimic the biosphere. First project was completed with Talley Associates in Dallas, Texas for the Allen Independent School District. It's a suburb in Collin County north of Dallas. So, in landscape architecture, there are a variety of different flows that we can evaluate when analyzing a site in its context, such as materials, energy, information, people, so on, right? There's more. Two of the most common that we deal with are flows of people and water through a site. The first takes form as circulation networks, and the latter through the subdivision and manipulation of surface. Many strategies have been developed for the management of stormwater that dovetail with sustainable and resilient design. These include detention, retention, and reuse. And the Allen Steam Center utilizes several of these. However, I'd like to illustrate in this example that trying to mimic the existing ecological operation of a site provides a different opportunity than one simply focusing on a more general idea of sustainability as an explicit goal for stormwater on site. The The site's approximately 7 acres that have been divided by creeks, forest, and grassland that was formerly used for agriculture. The school district acquired the property as a donation, possibly because it was nearly impossible to traditionally develop, given the amount of floodplain and the cost of tree mitigation. However, the complications for a typical development actually made it a fantastic location for a specialized education campus. The administrators of the district, as well as the teachers of the proposed STEAM Center, wanted to be able to use the surrounding land as a living laboratory for their classes. When our team began working on the project, the first thing we did was visit the site multiple times to understand what aspects of the property needed to be captured in the design to maximize that value. When we walked the site, we came across large areas of high canopy cedar elm forest with inland sea oak understory, dense scrub that included ash juniper and vines, creek edges with large water-loving trees where some have been lost to erosion, and more fairy tale-like decaying or moss-covered trees in the interior of the forest. When we started mapping the locations of our photos to the topographic survey of the site, some interesting patterns started to emerge. The different forest types started to correlate with the natural drainage patterns of the site. Areas with larger natural watersheds within had cedar elm forest followed by bois d'arc forest. Areas with the smallest natural watersheds had what we termed scrub forest. In order to preserve the ecological diversity of the site for use as a living laboratory for the school, we needed to find a way to maintain the hydrologic operation because it seemed to be organizing the plant communities present. There is a major complication, though. The approved building design is in the shape of a huge arc that's pushed right up against 2 floodplains. They need to do this to provide the grade difference for the bi-level entry that was required by the district and the architects. The building form and siding cut off the natural drainage to about half of the existing trees to the west and set up a condition that could potentially flood the school. For us, the proximity of the floodplain and the challenges of the building siding created actually a great opportunity for our team to design a unique stormwater approach. Many of the strategies that we typically must really advocate for to construct became necessary for the effective capture and reuse of water on the site. The proposed system redirects water from the parking areas through bioswales and dry creek conditions that integrate with the existing forest canopy to feed the cedar elm forest on the south end of the site. The water flowing toward the face of the building and from the roof is captured and directed to a cistern. Then the water from the cisterns distributed via a sump pump through a perforated pipe that sheet flows into the adjacent forest after storms have ended. This maintains the approximate amount of flow as was being delivered to the forest prior to construction and increases the detention time of the stormwater on site, which lowers the impacts of runoff from the developed project. The perimeter planting design uses a seeding strategy of midgrass prairie species to create multiple expressions of native prairie. These become organized based on the hydrology of the site. Areas that concentrate water begin to highlight different forbs and grasses and become legible as part of the living laboratory. The design of the dry creek is integrated within the existing forest in order to neither hide its performance or make a spectacle of it. This gives it a type of borrowed history, in my opinion, that helps situate the newly constructed school within the forest. Terraces are used in the area at the front of the building to facilitate collection of water for reuse. They provide functional space for the school and preserve forest remnants while accommodating student and emergency access. And in fact, the cistern actually works as is promised. Water is detained and reused in preserving the forest, but just let's not look too closely at the terminus of the pipes. We didn't control all the documents on it. So, pardon me real quick. So, now we've gotten the easy stuff out of the way. It's about to get weird. So, this project is from early in my career with SWA Group. I worked with them in Dallas and Shanghai. I was fortunate to have a kind of unique specialization in the office, so the principal I worked under gave me a lot of latitude to explore some unique approaches to some of the typical landscape strategic planning projects that we've performed. This project was based in Beijing and had a requested program that was well suited to investigating a circular design approach that attempts to loop together various flows within or adjacent to the development. Of course, Beijing is the seat of power in China, but with respect to this, more importantly, it's a metro area that houses approximately 22 million people. As a point of comparison, that's around 75% of the entire state of Texas. City is surrounded by mountains on the north and west sides, which create a very small watershed to support the rivers surrounding the city. Due to the lack of freshwater resources, a canal is constructed that's over 550 miles long that connects to the southwest side of the city to provide consistent water service. This aerial provides some context to where the project site is in relation to the metro area, as well as some scale to the site relative to the Beijing Olympic Park, which some of y'all may be familiar with from the 2008 Games. When we zoom in to this site aerial, the proposed development site shows the area located along the south and west edges of the river as it turns south. At the time our team worked on this project, the Wenyu could be best described as an ephemeral river. It's being a little generous. It's bigger than a stream, but not continuously flowing from snowmelt or runoff from the surrounding mountains. In fact, the only continuous flow is what would be termed Category 5 water in China, which is the lowest grade of water quality, and it's effectively wastewater from villages upstream. We'll come back to this in a minute. As we promised, we've gone up in scale. This development on the outskirts of Beijing is intended to house a population of 200,000 at its full build-out. The basic client request to organize the variety of building program that had been previously approved based on the zoning of the city around a central waterway that would be anchored by an agro-tourism village. This area would provide citizens living in the center of Beijing that had moved there from other rural parts of the country opportunity to take weekend trips, reconnect with their agricultural roots, go and pick fruit from orchards, and so on. This bird's eye view shows the proposed design, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, but it's something to keep in mind as I discuss the system developed to facilitate this proposed development. So, this is the same image. I'm just showing it in grayscale now that we have an opportunity to more honestly talk about what would be required to make this happen. The hypersaturated rendering sells the future vision, but in my opinion makes it difficult to digest the complications of the site condition. Given what we previously discussed regarding the freshwater resources of the metro area, we have to question where the water's coming from to create this central waterway shown here. When we asked the client about sourcing the water, they told us, you can have as much water from the river as you want. Well, as you may remember, I just said that the Wenyu was literal sewage from villages upstream. So, obviously, that's not going to be an opportunity for us to supply the central waterway. But in considering this as a problem that's necessary to negotiate to make this project happen, it gives us a fantastic opportunity to develop a system based on flows through and adjacent to the site. The first interconnection explored was how to integrate the required agro-tourism program with purifying the water from the river. Now, I'm not going to go through every detail of the interconnected flows for the sake of time, but I'm happy to take all the detailed questions that you may have in the Q&A. At its core, what we've called the agro-tourism module takes heavily polluted water from the river, feeds it into a series of very spatially efficient constructed wetlands that eventually feed into water storage areas for use in irrigating the orchards and greenhouses. Any excess water is then fed into the central waterway of the project. The greenhouses also provide water collection, produce for the city, and reuse of carbon dioxide as well as nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers that are produced from a more expansive system, which we're about to look at. The integrated infrastructural system proposed for the development uses 46 of the agricultural modules to help close loops for waste streams produced by an anticipated population of 200,000. Systems of wastewater treatment, organic waste processing, and energy generation tie together through the agricultural systems to create a highly looped infrastructural approach that attempts to approximate circular design at this scale, where the byproduct being filtered water to create a central waterway that eventually outflows back into the Windey River. Type 5 water is brought in, and much less polluted Type 3 water is sent back to the river. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these for sake of time, but we did quantify the potential benefits provided by the proposed design to provide the financial justification for the additional investment required to create the system. I'll admit that this is not what most people would think of as a landscape architecture project, but at the urban scale, it starts to develop an infrastructural strategy as well as sizing to the systems that can allow them to be distributed throughout the development and used as a scaffolding for other uses to connect onto as needs arise or change over time. The next project we'll look at takes one of these loops and applies it at the site scale to respond to the client program and contextual issues. Sorry. This project's located in Zhengzhou, China, which is a major interior city that sits adjacent to the Yellow River. This area was settled along the edge of a massive floodplain of the Yellow River, which existed prior to the creation of control structures upriver. Even with those flood control measures, the area still suffers massive flooding periodically. In 2021, the city received almost 8 inches of rain in 1 hour and over 24 inches in a 3-day span. In 2019, prior to the 2021 floods, we were approached by Callis and RTKL to work on the design for a nature and culture center. The building's designed to serve as an anchor for a new development area on the southwest side of the city by initially operating as a sales office for the developer of the new neighborhood. After sufficient sales are accomplished, it'll be handed over to the city to provide the surrounding community access to nature and cultural amenities within a public park. The waterfront park and associated reservoir are being created to serve as flood infrastructure for the anticipated runoff that will be created by converting what is now largely existing agricultural land to densely urbanized development. In this aerial from 2003, we can see the agricultural character of the area prior to development. If you look closely, you can also potentially read from the configuration of the agricultural plots running north and south between the buildings to the east and center of the frame. There's a low-lying drainage area. It's not actually a creek, it's just a low area that water is collecting from the surrounding fields. By 2018, major east-west connector was constructed along the north edge of the property, and major earthworks were being performed to create the flood control waterway that will serve as the waterfront edge of the Nature and Culture Center. As you can see, for designing a site for a Nature and Culture Center, they didn't leave us a lot to work with on the nature front. So we had to develop a strategy for how to create the site conditions suitable for the specific type of interaction with nature that was desired by the client, as well as the framing of the building as an important cultural center for the community. The architectural concept provided by CRTKL was part Audubon Center and part Visual and Performing Arts House. To encourage the bird watching program for the site, the building was bound together with an observation ring, which provided visitors unique elevated views over what was being assumed to be a pristine wetland bird habitat. Client also wanted the rectangular volumes of the center and the ring to be mirrored in a plane of water at the bottom level of the building. Given these requirements, we had 2 major issues for the site design. First, the scale of the reflecting pool could potentially require a lot of water, and it would not be attractive if they ever had to turn it off due to water restrictions. Second, there was no way to construct wetland habitat for birds at the edge of the reservoir. The water fluctuates 5 meters from normal pool level and up to 8 meters when taking flood into consideration. So we're talking about a 16-foot change between the full pool level and minimum, and a 25-foot change whenever considering the flood. Our proposal here creates a constant level habitat pond that's separated from the main water channel. It would only be inundated in flood conditions, but would otherwise be unaffected by the change in level of the reservoir. The overall grade from the city-facing perimeter of the site to the water edge is 9.5 meters. Building was designed with an entry at the urban edge 5 meters higher than the entry and exit at the park side, as you can see here with the level 1 entry at 4.5 and the level 2 at 9.5. Our proposal takes advantage of this 30-foot grade change across the site to use the urban runoff from the reservoir to feed the reflecting pool by cleaning it first through a series of terraced constructed wetlands that step down the slope of the site, using gravity to feed it through the entire system. This system provides a constant water source for the reflecting pool, eliminating the risk of water rationing impacting the use of the center. It also cascades down into the constant level pond to maintain the wetland and marginal habitat around it, then eventually is reintroduced purified water back into the main channel. The plan shows the interrelationship between the design of the circulation and wetlands. The three-dimensional space defined by the terrace wetlands guide people down the slope to the promenade level and eventually to the water level at the main reservoir. The edges of the water elements break down and blend together in a pixelated pattern of stone block that provides interest within the reservoir as the water recedes. The constructed wetlands are deliberately organized to create relationships based on the required vertical drop between them in order for them to be gravity fed. It also creates consistently designed relationships of the terrace walls to the adjacent walks, as shown in the section here. The wetlands themselves are hydraulically connected through pipes below grade, which we'll look at here a little more closely. The variety of subsurface and surface water wetlands that have been created and the way that water connects between them offer unique opportunities for people to interact with water in a multisensory fashion throughout the park. The wetlands, reflecting pool, habitat pond, and reservoir all offer different ways to experience water and how it can be used within the park. The walls of the terraces define comfortable spaces for people to walk or gather where clearings between trees are required to allow sunlight to penetrate into the actual constructed wetlands for them to operate effectively. Okay, so better take a big drink this time. Circling back now on how the metrics of water purification for the wetlands were used to size and design the terraces. We chose the maximum volume of water that would be required to circulate the reflecting pool as the constraining factor. Here the volume for it is calculated to be 450 cubic meters. We decided as a ballpark decision early in the process to assume that it was totally turning over the water in it at least twice a day. However, if we made it more shallow, we could increase the rate of turnover. That gives us a baseline of 900 cubic meters of water required purified from the wetlands per day. The entire wetland system is designed to accommodate at least 1,000 cubic meters per day, pumped from the reservoir to enter at stage 2. Gray water from the building, as well as contaminated runoff from the parking lot or adjacent streets, actually enter a sand filter in stage 1 that's treated beforehand. After passing through the 7 stages, 920 cubic meters per day of purified water enters the reflecting pool. This has a water quality that has improved by 50% of removal of the organic contaminants, 55% removal of total nitrogen, and 90% of the total phosphorus. So we've talked about the water and how that all operates, but what do people actually do here? In addition to the spaces designed along the circulation paths that we've discussed within the constructed wetlands, key areas are created for larger gatherings near the upper and lower entries of the building. These can accommodate things like old people dancing, outdoor events, performances, or just everyday things like vendors or markets. Within the greater site, pavilions and viewing decks for specialty use or education are located in proximity to key circulation connections. Now, in terms of our use of time as a design driver, we've covered, in my opinion at this point for this project, the instantaneous and continuous time scale of the flow of the water system. But we've ignored the time frame of the entire project lifespan. What implication does that have in terms of a circular design approach for this? To refer back to our early definition of circular design with respect to time spans, I said that long time frames typically require more adaptable design to be more sustainable. There are some assumptions underlying this. Most importantly, it's assuming that regarding the design of public space, projects that last 100 years are going to be more sustainable than projects that are renovated every 25 to 30 years. All right. It also assumes that we have no magic ball to know exactly what the communities being served by our designs in 100 years will want in terms of social uses, or that it's even possible to know what that community might be. This design creates a landscape infrastructural framework that would persist with areas of social program within it that could change over the full life of the project so that they could accommodate these future uses. To give some scale perspective to the size and variety of the spaces, the plan on the right shows the grounds of the Blanton here on campus. Some of y'all may be familiar with this. So, the landscape types that were included provide a diverse experience across the site that references the history of the place by incorporating the agricultural landscape. But it also provides a lot of further opportunities to insert future programs into the site. Pretty much anywhere that's not in the grayscale circle could be used for different purposes in the future. Occupation of these spaces would be determined based on the different opportunities they afford, whether it be a level area next to a roadway, a space that's situated in the slope, or potentially a level area adjacent to the waterways. Now, this bird's eye view shows the state that in practice we are typically working to, the condition that we would hope for at initial construction of the project. It doesn't perfectly represent the variety of the landscape types that were designed, but the levels of the main water bodies and the landscape infrastructural framework of circulation and constructed wetlands are true. However, there are still some additional opportunities to make the design of the system over time more circular. One of which is thinking about how the wetlands are maintained. So over the life of the project, the impoundment of the reservoir that's just to the lower right that is off the view would create sedimentation within the reservoir itself. This buildup of material would have to be dredged periodically to allow for continued proper management of stormwater over the life of the park. Potentially, this dredged material could be reused to renovate the constructed wetlands over time. Of course, it would have to be tested to assess any contamination levels, making sure that it wouldn't prohibit its operating effectively as a material for the constructed wetlands. But it could end up being a valuable, essentially free resource for rebuilding the performance over decades. So, next I'd like to talk about some questions that I've been thinking about that are connected to and extend upon the previous work. These are areas of practical research that I'm hoping to develop soon, but at the moment they are simply questions. I'll first walk through a case study as an anecdote intended to represent a significant portion of constructed landscape architecture projects. The aerial shown here is of a development that was originally called the IBM Solana campus in the town of Westlake, Texas, which is northwest of Dallas. It's only showing a portion of the overall development, which was originally designed by Ricardo Legarreta and Peter Walker and Partners, which at that time also included Martha Schwartz. While working at PWP, I heard Peter Walker say that the greatest regret of his career was that halfway through it, half of the projects that he had designed were already gone. The desire to create legacy-built work was foundational to the office and was integrated into all facets of the design process there, starting with the selection of projects and ending with the way that they were detailed and reviewed in construction. IBM Solana was one of the first major projects that supported the establishment of his new office after he left SWA. The aerial shown here is from 2012, less than 25 years after the construction was completed on this phase of the work. At the time, IBM, the primary tenant, had left and the owners filed for bankruptcy when they were unable to fill the massive amount of office space left empty. As this type of business model goes, the new owners chose to renovate to attract new tenants and increase the rents of the existing ones to maximize their investment. By 2013, major site renovations had been completed on the main mall, as well as the area adjacent to the building on the lower side of the project. By 2015, a second round of renovations had been done, as shown in the plan here on number 2. By 2019, the property had again been sold, and the new owner hired us to redesign for a third time in less than a decade the landscape area highlighted here in plan number 3. These images show the original design, the 2015 revision, and our current redesign, but do not show the interim renovation that happened between the first and second columns. The reason I'm providing this case study is because it was originally conceived and constructed with the intention of it being a legacy project. PWP designed and constructed this with the intention of it being here for at least 100 years. Reality, however, is that not only did it not last 30 years, but it underwent multiple revisions during that period. So, to revisit our original discussion of the time spans related to circular design. For long time spans, projects are more sustainable by being more adaptable. For short times, they need to be more reusable in terms of the material selections and construction methods. To implement this approach requires a radical honesty within the practice of the most likely lifespan of our projects. If we're working on a project for a developer that will be resold near the end of the financing of the original construction, we should not expect it to be intact more than 25 or 30 years. So what does this imply for our design decisions? First, as we saw in the previous example, we should be attempting to create frameworks that provide integral functions to the project that also have spaces within that can be repurposed as the needs and desires of the community change. Second, we should be choosing materials and detailing the construction in such a way that simplifies the reuse of them in other construction or future incarnations of the site. This could mean simply being more thoughtful about using materials that match with the existing context or focusing on unitized materials that can be harvested and reused easily. It could also imply that we should rethink the detailing of systems that are designed for a 100-year longevity rather than a 25 or 30-year lifespan. For instance, reinforced concrete is one of the most common materials used in site construction. It's designed with the expectation that it'll survive 100 years if properly maintained, but the corrosion of the steel limits that life to that time. This inclusion of significant amounts of steel reinforcement is both very energy and resource intensive and makes it much harder to harvest and reuse for the base materials themselves. Are there other options that provide a lifespan appropriate to the true development timeline of 25 to 30 years that could make it easier and cheaper to reutilize the material instead of continuing to quarry limestone to make cement? These are a few of the things that I've been researching regarding material selection for site construction and how it relates to circular design. Okay, this is it, y'all. We're getting there. So this is a big problem, though, and it leads in many different directions. I became interested in produced waters related to oil and gas production in grad school because of a studio project where I did a lot of research on the hydraulic fracturing process. In order to hydraulically fracture wells, millions of gallons of water with some proprietary additives and sand are injected into the formation to crack open faults. These are then propped open by the sand, and that allows hydrocarbons, be it oil or gas, to more easily flow to the wellhead. When that pressure is released from the fracturing process, a huge portion of the water under pressure is forced back up and out of the well, and it has to be captured at that point because it has contaminants that are picked up from the geology of the formation, as well as the additives that were originally provided. Last fall, I heard a news story that was describing a recently identified problem in West Texas where produced waters were resurfacing through abandoned wells and contaminating the properties of private landowners. Many of the ranches in West Texas are a minimum of thousands of acres, if not tens of thousands, which makes it incredibly hard for owners to immediately identify when they have an issue like this. This sort of soil contamination that occurs from spills like this varies based on the specific contaminants of the produced waters at that location, but the most common is high quantities of various salts that are picked up in the subsurface geology. So, bare minimum, this sort of spill is literally salting the earth at the locations that the spills occur. My initial research ideas regarded how do we identify and or mitigate the issues where these types of spills occur, raises questions regarding how we can remotely sense these sorts of spills, possibly with drones or remote imagery. Also calls into question, what would we sense? One thought is that we could use seeding strategies around abandoned wells on private properties that have different species that would be expressed in the presence of salt water. Are there halophytic species indigenous to the Chihuahuan Desert that would grow better in the presence of salt water than other species? Could this difference be legible from a helicopter or drone or even satellite imagery? However, when we start to evaluate this through a circular design approach, different questions are asked. Instead of how do we identify the areas around wells that produced waters are reemerging because of injecting them into disposal wells after hydraulic fracturing, the question becomes, how do we reuse the produced waters instead of re-injecting them in the disposal wells? How does it become an input for another more productive loop? While considering this, I thought back to a curious project that I had in Pecos, Texas a few years back. City of Pecos shown here in this aerial with the project site boundary and a white outline with Interstate 20 crossing the project site. It borders the south edge of the town. Our client wanted to take advantage of the boomtown economics of the industry at that time, where hotel rooms in any town from Midland to Pecos were more than $300 a night and completely filled every night with workers. Project was hoping to create a massive high-end RV camp because monthly rentals for workers to simply rent a space to park their RV could be up to $1,500 a month. Interesting part of the project is that the city wanted a two-part plan in order to approve the RV camp. They weren't interested in more RV parking. They wanted more housing. But they were asking for a plan that could accommodate the initial RV camp that could be converted to future housing development. This map starts to identify the complexity and intensity of the opportunity. A map from the Texas Railroad Commission GIS portal shows all the wells in the area, overlaid with areas of pivot irrigated agriculture highlighted on the lower left. The orange circles with white borders are commercial disposal wells in the vicinity that may be re-injecting produced waters. Is there an opportunity to treat and reuse produced waters that may help create development opportunities in Pecos or support other industries? Could this same system be converted to use brackish water to create an oasis in the town where the boomtown economics wane? These are the types of questions that I'm currently interested in pursuing in my professional work that relates to flows, adaptive reuse, and circular design. I truly have no idea where it'll lead, but I'm excited to consider all the different paths. I'm looking forward to any question or ideas for pursuing this work further, and thank you so much for your time.